Hey guys, just real quick, I'm going to go over how to do word problems with quadratics. First, it's been a while, so let's go ahead and practice factoring with this problem right here. Now you can factor this normally, setting this one equal to 0, where you get an x squared minus an 18x plus a 32 is equal to 0. So we try to see, okay, what multiplies to get or positive 32 that adds together to get a negative 18. Well, it's going to be a negative 16 and a negative 2 because they multiply together to get 32, and they add together to get that negative 18. So you're going to have an x minus 16 and an x minus 2. Now, if I ask you for the solutions or to solve this, that's just factoring it. If I ask you what's the solutions, you would tell me x equals a positive 16 or a positive 2. Now, the reason I get positive 16 and positive 2 is because I set x minus 16 equal to 0 and x minus 2 equal to 0 and then solve them. And if you set each of those equal to 0, well, you just basically add the opposite. So that's why it's a positive 16, and the same reasoning for the 2. Something else I want to talk about is the vertex form parabolas. Make sure you remember vertex form, especially this minus h and this plus k there. The vertex of any parabola is always going to be in the form h comma k. We can always turn something from a quadratic form into vertex form by completing the square. So if you ever complete the square, you're going to end up something that looks something like this. And when you have something like that, it is in vertex form. So then you can figure out what the x of the vertex is and what the y of the vertex is. We'll be using that today in our word problem, so it's important. There are 3 types of word problems we kind of want to deal with, really 4, but 2 of them kind of go together. It's when the max height, what is the max height, and how high it is at blank seconds, when will it reach the ground, area problems, and the product of consecutive numbers. So we'll look at all 3 of those, really 4 of those type of problems today, real quick. Here's the first type. It's a soccer ball is resting on the ground, is kicked in an initial upward velocity of 27 feet per second. They give us a quadratic equation where h is our height and t is our time. The soccer ball's in the air. Now it says, when does the ball reach its maximum height? It's asking when. If I was going to graph this, it would be, okay, time on my x-axis, height on my y-axis. And we know that in any parabola, the vertex is right on the axis of symmetry. And how do we find the axis of symmetry? The axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2a. All we need to do is plug in what we know from the equation here. So we know we have negative 16t squared plus a 27t. And then you could say plus 0 if you wanted to. So our a is negative 16, so you have a negative 16 times the 2, which gives us a negative 32, over a negative b. So our b is 27, so that's a negative 27. Now it makes sense that I have 2 negatives here, because a negative divided by a negative gives me a positive answer. So then I can, and our time should be positive, so that makes sense. So let's do 27 divided by a 32 to see approximately what we get there. So I take a 27, I divide it by a 32, and I get a 0.84375. So I'm going to round that to about a 0.84, just for simplicity's sake. We're going to say it's about 0.84 seconds. Now it's important to remember that this is in seconds because we talked about time. Now it says, what is the maximum height? Well, to figure out what that maximum height is, all we have to do is take that 0.84 seconds and plug it into our quadratic equation. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're plugging in 0.84 for our t's here. So we're going to have to square it, multiply it by negative 16, and then multiply it by 27 and add that all together. Do that in your calculator now to see if you get the right answer. So first I squared 0.84 to get 0.7056, then multiplied that by a negative 16 to get this negative 11.2896. Now I'm going to add that to this 22.68. I'm going to add that negative 11.2896 to see that we get 11.39. So about 11.39, and that's going to be, it looks like we are in feet, so it's going to be feet. If it said round to the nearest tenth, you'd round to the nearest tenth. If it said hundredth, you'd round to the nearest hundredth. If it doesn't specify, the nearest hundredth is typically proper. I think we asked for the nearest tenth on your test. And then to find out how high the ball is at 0.5 seconds, well, just plug in 0.5 into that original equation that they gave us right up here. That's all we're really doing here. So I have a negative 16, and then we have that 0.5 squared plus a 27 times that 0.5. And all we need to do is plug that in. So let's plug that in real quick. So when you take a 0.25, which is what 0.5 squared is, multiply it by a negative 16, you get a negative 4. Then we multiply a 27 times 0.5 to get a 13.5. We add those two together, and then when we add those two together, you get a 9.5. So it's 9.5 feet. Now it makes sense that this is smaller than our vertex because that's the maximum height. If I got a number that was bigger than that, then alarm bell should go off. I did something wrong. Let's go ahead and look at the next problem. It says the formula h equals negative 16t squared plus 80t models the height of a model rocket where h is the height of the rocket after t seconds. If the rocket is fired at an initial velocity of 80 meters a second, when will the rocket hit the ground? So they're launching a rocket and then it's hitting the ground at some point. We need to figure out when will it actually hit the ground there. So to figure out when it actually hits the ground right here, we have to make our height equal to 0. So we basically take this whole equation right here and just set it equal to 0. So I'm going to have a negative 16t squared plus an 80t is equal to 0. Now you see this when you have two variables on the same side and equal to something, alarm bell should go off because now we can complete the square. That's probably the easiest way to do this problem. So I divide everything by negative 16 to get t squared all by itself. That's a very important step, otherwise we'll get very confused. So we take t squared plus 80 divided by a negative 16 is going to give you a negative 5t. And then I'm going to leave a little space here, and then that's going to be equal to 0. So now is where students start to get scared because we have to actually complete the square to solve this problem now. So to complete the square, we take that negative 5, I divide it by a 2, and that's going to give, and then I square that, and then whatever that is, I put it in right here, and you have to put it on this side as well. So you're going to get a 25 divided by a 4, and whether you want to put that as a decimal or as a fraction, I really don't mind. But if we take a 25 divided by a 4, it's going to give you 6.25. So you can say plus 6.25 here, and then plus 6.25 here. It doesn't really matter because we're about to undo it. We're about to get it back to t, and then it's going to be minus 5 halves, and that's going to be squared is equal to a 6.25. The real important part of squaring that and then getting this number, which is that is equal to that 6.25, is to add it on both sides to get it over here on that right side. So now we take the square root of both sides. So I have a t is minus a, whether it's 5 halves or whether you want to say what 5 halves is, which is just 2.5. And then that's equal to 6.25. Really, the square root of 6.25. So we have to take the square root of 6.25. So if you type in 6.25 or you recognize 625 and you take the square root of it, you get 2.5. Except that's going to be plus or minus 2.5. Plus or minus 2.5. So I'm going to add 2.5 to both sides here. And I get t is equal to, I'm going to add 2.5 together, 2.5 plus a 2.5. I'm going to subtract them together, 2.25 minus a 2.5. Sorry, I've been saying 2.25. It's 2.5. I get a 5 here, and I get a 0 here. So t is either a 0 or a 5. So it says, when will the rocket hit the ground? It either hit the ground at 0 seconds or at 5 seconds. Well, obviously it started on the ground, so of course it was at 0. So we're going to say 5 seconds here as our answer, because 0 seconds doesn't make any sense. That's where we started. It did hit the ground at 0 because that's where we started, but our answer is 5 seconds. We solved that by just completing the square. Let's look at the next type of problem. A rectangle has dimensions of b minus 3 by b minus 6. The area of the rectangle is 640 centimeters. Find the dimensions. This is probably the one most like one on your test. The one on your test is actually easier than this. So basically you just, I'm multiplying these two things together to get 640. So you get a b squared, then you have minus 3b, and then minus a 6b, plus an 18 is equal to 640. The reason I say this is easier is because the one on your test is you might not necessarily have to FOIL. So you have a negative 9b plus 18 is equal to 640. You have to set this equal to 0, so bye-bye 640. So I have a minus 640 there. So I take a 18 and subtract 640 from it to get negative 622. So I have a b squared minus 9b minus a 622. Now I don't want to sit here and figure out the factors of negative 622. So I'm going to plug this into my quadratic formula. So I have a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a, which is just 1, times c, which is a negative 622. So that's going to add together, all divided by a 2a, which is just 2. So I just take a 4 and multiply it by 622 to get 2,488. We're adding an 81 to that. We're taking the square root of that. So we're going to take this 50.69 just about, and we're going to add it and subtract it. But the rectangle has dimensions. So I know that the rectangle isn't going to have negative dimensions, so it's not going to make any real sense to subtract this from 9, because I know that that's going to give me a negative answer. So I'm going to add it to 9. So I get a 59. I'm going to add it to the actual number, and then I'm going to divide it by 2, and I get about a 29.84. So about 29.84 centimeters was the original dimensions. Well, it actually says find the dimensions. So I would actually take this, which is my b. Let's subtract 3 from it. So I have a b as a 29.84. I'm going to have to subtract 3 from it to get 26.84. I'm going to subtract 6 from it to get a 23.84. So those are my dimensions of my shape. And can't forget to label. We got our centimeters. So don't forget that last step of plugging it into both of these to actually find the actual dimensions. Now let's look at the last type of problem. This last type of problem is probably the closest related to just logical problem solving. It says write an equation for the product p of two consecutive integers, n. So consecutive means right next to each other. So 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. Those are going to be consecutive integers. So we know that we're finding the product because the product of them is 182. So that doesn't give us a whole lot to go off of, but let's start with what they gave us. They gave us, they wanted us to use an integer n. Okay, so if I have n, I know that the next thing, the thing after n, is going to have to be n plus 1 because it's the next number. It's consecutive. The product of those multiplied together is going to give us 182. And now we have an equation we can actually use to solve. Distributing that n gives us n squared plus n equals a 182. I subtract 182 on both sides to get n squared plus n minus 182 is equal to 0. Now I don't want to sit here all day and try to figure out what multiplies together to get 182 that adds together to get 1, because that's just guess and check. This is a system that works every time. So I'm going to use the quadratic equation. Negative We have a 1 for b. We have a 1 for a. So that's a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is just 1, minus 4 times a, which is just 1, times c, which is negative 182. Negative times a negative is a positive, so I'm just going to kind of ignore that. And then divide it by 2a, which is just 2. Take a 4, and I'm going to multiply that by my 182 to get 728. Add 1 to that, I get 729. Take the square root, I get 27. So I have a negative 1 here, plus or minus the 27 that I got when I took the square root there, divided by 2. Well, this gives us two different answers, because negative 1 plus 27 is going to give you a negative, it's going to give you a 26, divided by 2 gives us a 13. And if I subtract it, I get a negative 28 divided by 2, which is negative 14. Well, those are not consecutive integers at all. And if I multiplied those two together, I'd get a negative answer. Well, it's because you actually have 4 answers here. Well, really 2, but 4 for the consecutive integers. N is either going to be a 13 or a negative 14. So our n is going to be 13 or our negative 14. But our consecutive integers, which is what the problem asked for, it asked what's the consecutive integers that multiply together. Well, the next number after 13 is 14. So those multiply together to get a positive 182. And if I add a positive 1 to a negative 14, I get a negative 13, which a negative times a negative is also a positive 182. So really, both of those answers work. You can have all 4 of those as your answers. Make sure to include all those to make sure you get all the points on a test. Hope this helps. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Later. One last thing, because I forgot about it. If you ever see something that says consecutive even numbers or consecutive odd numbers, it doesn't matter whether it says consecutive even or odd. In order to get to the next even number or to get to the next odd number, instead of adding just 1, n plus 1, you're going to have to add 2. The reason we're adding 2, I'm showing you right here. If I wanted to go from 3 to 5 to 7 or 2 to 4 to 6, all of those are plus 2. So if it says consecutive even or odd, your equations are basically going to be n and then an n plus 2 to get to the next number. There you go.